Good morning, everyone. So we'd just like to ask everyone to take their seats, please, so we can get started. Thank you for coming. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Would love for you all to take your seats. And when we do, I might be able to point out a few, like there's one right over there, if somebody wants to come down. This is one of those when the music stops, if you're not in a chair, you may be out of luck. There's one down here. There's two over here, if somebody wants to slide in. Oh my gosh, this is so wonderful to see you all here. Good morning. Good morning. Thank you. Welcome to Terminating Hate, Breaking the Cycle of Extremism. We're really delighted to be hosting this important event here at Annenberg, and it is really heartening to see so many of you joining us as we all come together to confront extremism, one of the most important issues impacting our politics, our culture, and our daily lives today. I'd really love to thank the Schwarzenegger Institute for bringing us all together, along with their partners, USC's Shoah Foundation, USC's Center for Race and Equity, and of course, the Price School of Public Policy. This event really represents the wider USC community coming together for these critical conversations. The trends that we are watching are, by any measure, extremely troubling. Political parties today is deeply divided as they've been for a century. That divide reinforced by increasingly hostile and offensive rhetoric. Citizens far apart on issues that are fundamental to our democracy and fundamental to our daily life: free speech, press freedom, voting rights. We are increasingly a society characterized by deep and unyielding polarization. By the way, something we study very closely and with great intensity here at USC Annenberg. While this is most certainly not a uniquely American phenomenon, over the past several decades, extremism has raised its ugly head in liberal democracies around the world. We are confronting this in very real and very alarming ways, very close to home. This past year, hate crimes increased across major American cities to record levels. Here in LA, police recorded 643 hate crimes in 2022 alone. It was the highest number. Nationally, hate crimes reported to the FBI rose 31% between 2021 and 2022. And anti-Semitic incidents in the US rose 36% last year, to the highest levels since the Anti-Defamation League started keeping track in 1979. It is very clear America is facing a level of extremism unseen since arguably World War II. But let's draw an important distinction. This isn't like World War II or even 9/11, when we were forced to navigate extremist threats from outside our country. This is a threat that we are facing from within. So here we are, to name the problem out loud, to critically look at its causes, and to frankly and openly discuss and advance solutions. For example, what tools do we have to break extremism's toxic hold, especially as we gear up for the 2024 election? So thank you to you, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and Dr. Erroll Southers for organizing Terminating Hate, and a huge welcome to our extraordinary participants. CNN's chief political correspondent, Dana Bash, will be up here on stage in just a moment. She is both participating in today's panel, leading it for us, and also covering it for CNN. And she's already been booked to come back. So any Annenberg students who are hoping to have a few minutes with Dan, the great Dana Bash, if not today, we promise we'll get her back. We'll get her back here again. So thank you. Again, thank you all for being here today. Your participation is the most important part of today's event. So welcome, and let's begin. And now it's my pleasure to introduce someone who absolutely needs no introduction, our extraordinary former governor of California, Arnold Schwarzenegger, who is a powerful voice against extremism and hate. Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Well, thank you very much, Dean Willow Bay, for the nice introduction. It's exactly the way I wrote it. Thank you. And thank you so much for helping us organize this event also, Willow. We really appreciate that. So thank you also to Dana Bash for being here today. She's an extraordinary journalist, and I just love the way you report. And that's why it was so important for us to have her come out here and do the fireside chat with me and others. And so thank you very much for being here. Let's give her another big hand. And Mr. Turtletop, very famous director. And I mention him also because we have been friends for a long time. And with his family, we've skied together in Sun Valley. Now it's nice to see him, with his extraordinary family. His kids are skiing up there now and all that stuff. But anyway, it's great for you to be here and to be part of our panel discussion. Thank you very much. Big hand also to him. Erroll Southers, my friend here, that we have known each other for 40 years. And we were just talking about it, that when we met at World Gym, riding the life cycle every day, I was riding it a half an hour a day before I started working out with weights. And every time I got off the life cycle, he was still sitting on it and bicycling away, riding that life cycle. And there was sweat dripping down left and right. And then when I was finished with my weight training, he was still on that life cycle. So I said to him one day, I said, why are you riding the life cycle so much? And he says, well, look at me, I'm fat. I say, you're not fat, you look kind of strong. I mean, come on. Anyway, so this is how we met, and we have had a great time. He became a police officer in Santa Monica. Then he got at my house secretly in Santa Monica. He came by for advice about his career when he then went to the FBI and started working for the FBI. And then eventually when I became governor, because I hired him, he was part of the Homeland Security team and so on. So really fantastic guy and an expert now dealing with this issue of prejudice. So thank you very much for being here today. Let's give him a big hand also. We want to also thank the Annenberg School of Communication and Journalism for letting us use the facility here, which is really fantastic. And I think it's really great because it's appropriate, because I think the issue that we're dealing with here, when it has to do with prejudice and hate, a lot of it has to do with communication. And this is why this is the appropriate center to have this event here today. And that's why I know that Willow, you will be very important in the future, because I told you already, communication is, I think, the #1 issue here. And so this is the perfect center, and you're the perfect dean for that. So you're going to help us in the future to solve some of those problems. So thank you very much. Then we have an Austrian delegation here. I mean, can you believe that? An Austrian delegation with Ambassador Petra Schneebauer here. Thank you very much for coming all the way from Washington. Then we have the Minister of Youth and Education from Austria right here, Claudia Blackholm. Thank you very much for being here today. And they're here because this is not just an issue that is happening in America. That's an issue they in Austria also concerned about, because hate crimes and hate violations have gone up there too. So that's why they're here, and we really appreciate for them to take the bull by the horn and to really be very actively involved in this issue. So thank you very much about that. And then I want to say thank you to Simon Bergson, who's sitting right over here. Simon, I want you to get up. I want everyone to see you. This is Simon Bergson. He's the chairman of the Auschwitz Jewish Center Foundation. And it's actually his fault that we're all here today. I'm just joking, but I mean, I tell you, the way this whole thing really began was because just a year ago, Simon, through his foundation, invited me to come to Auschwitz and to receive an award. And he wrote me this eloquent letter and said, Arnold, you've done so much to fight prejudice and hate, and you've done such wonderful speeches. Notice we at our center in Auschwitz, we want to, present you with an award, a humanitarian award. And you just have to come over there and receive it. June 21st is the date. So I said to him, I said, Simon, I cannot come to Auschwitz on June 21st. He says, why not? I said, because I'm filming in Canada, in Toronto, a TV series for Netflix called Fuba. I said, and we are living in a bubble. I said, because of COVID. So I cannot leave the set. We cannot have any visitors come to the set or anything like that. So I cannot go. I said, but forget the award. I don't need another award. I said, I will go to Auschwitz the next time I go to Europe. And that's exactly what I did. After my filming was over in September, middle of September, I had to shoot a commercial in Munich for BMW, for electric cars. And I then called Simon. I said, Simon, I'm going to be in Munich in September, end of September. How about us meeting in Auschwitz right after that? I shoot up there with the plane. You meet me there, and then we go and tour Auschwitz, the concentration camp. And he said, fantastic. And that's exactly where we met. And we were touring this facility, this concentration camp. And we had this fantastic tour guide that really explained everything so well. And there we were, and we were looking at each other and said, this is an amazing story. And here's Simon, who was in a relocation camp in Austria in 1947. And I was born with a father that was a Nazi. Think about that. One generation later, here we are together, hugging each other, touring the concentration camp, talking about the atrocities that went on, the 1.3 million people that were killed there. I said, this is how we can change. I don't have to do exactly what my father did. I don't have to copy him. We can change. With the age of 18, I feel like we kind of like have our own minds. And we can say, well, we're going to go in a different direction with this generation. And so this is why we toured then. We talked. We flew together to Vienna after that. And we had a great time. And after that visit, we got a tremendous reaction from all over the world. And so I decided then, I said, well, we should continue on with this. And I should actually do a speech. And then all of a sudden I was invited by the Stockton University in New Jersey to do a speech about hate. And then I went there to do the speech. And then I put that speech also online. And then there was a huge explosion. I mean, it was absolutely amazing, the reaction we got. Almost 100 million people viewed that tape and that speech. 3 billion people impression. 3 billion impressions, think about that. That means 3 billion people read or saw that about that speech. So we knew that we were onto something. Why people were sharing it so many times, those videos and so on. So then I got together with my team here at USC at the Schwarzenegger Institute. And I said, you know, I think that we should have an event, because we have so many great events here every year about infrastructure, about political reforms, about redistricting reform, about healthcare reform, about immigration, and all those different kind of issues. I said, let's talk about that. This is a most important issue. Not as simple as the other subjects, because we know how to fix the other stuff. We know how to build infrastructure. We know how to go and get rid of the fixed political system. We know all those things. All we have to do is just go in there and fix it. But with hate and prejudice, it's a very complicated and difficult issue that has been around since the human race has been around. And so this is why it's important for all of us to get together here and to talk. And even though people say this can never be solved, I say, yes, we can. Yes, we can solve the issue, but we have to get into it and all work together. So with that, I will going to go sit down now with Dana here. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Arnold. While Arnold takes the far seat, We're going to be joined on stage by Dana Bash, who will run a fireside chat with Arnold about some of these topics.
Hello, Dana.
Thank
Now,
you.
if I call you instead of Dana, Dana,
Yeah,
it's just my Austrian accent, okay?
I honestly, I'll answer to anything.
Okay.
Whatever you say, I'll respond. That was amazingly powerful, and I'm going to ask you a lot more about that. Thank you for having me here, and thank you for doing what you're doing. And as you're talking, I'm thinking you could use your platform for anything, and you have for a lot of different things, and you still do. To help with society, to help with children, to help with the planet. Why is this topic, terminating hate, so important to you at this moment in time?
I think we see a rise, as you've heard, the statistics. We see a rise of hatred and hate crimes, not only in America, but all over the world. And I always feel kind of like when you're a celebrity, you have the responsibility to use your platform, your power of influence in the world on so many millions of people, and use it for something good. And since I am very much into the thing of trying to give something back, not just to take, I thought that it was important for me to talk about this issue because I come from a background, from a country that was part of the Second World War, Austria, that committed tremendous atrocities. And I remember that my mother telling me that when there was the Anschluss, when Austria joined Germany, within a few days, when she rode her bicycle to work, to Mürzzuschlag, she saw dead people lying there on the side of the road, and some of them were hanging. And she went to her superior. She was a young girl then. And she went to her superior where she worked at the government office, at the local government office. And she was complaining about that. She says, it's horrible what I've seen today. And he said to her, he says, look, if I would be you, I would be quiet. Otherwise, you would be lying there next. So this is the kind of direction that those kind of things can go. And so I don't want that to happen again. Nowhere in the world. Not in Austria, not in Germany, not in America, nowhere. And so this is why it is very important to me that we do everything that we can. Now, I know that I'm just one voice, maybe a strong voice, but a voice. And that we need a lot of people to come together. And this is why I think this today is very important. And I'm so happy that we have so many students from USC here today listening to that, because this is the young generation. We are relying on them to learn about this and to figure out a way of how do we solve this problem without just accusing the other side of being stupid or being prejudiced or being into hate and all this. That's not going to solve the problem. So we need experts here to really get into the meat of it and try to figure out how to solve it.
Well, on that note, you talk about, I mean, the whole idea is solutions, right? It's raising awareness, which you have done and you continue to do, but it's finding solutions. You talked about not accusing people. How important is that when it comes to just being able to reach people, to get them to listen for more than 5 seconds, and then perhaps to allow themselves to be educated?
Well, it's all about communication. You know, this is why it was important in my video to not just attack the other side, but to ask them to join us and to get out of that mode of hate. And here's what you do. And I just told them how to go about that. And to explain to them that hate in the end never pays off. And all of the various different organizations and governments that were known for hate became losers. So that's number one. Number two, I remember a story from my father-in-law, Sergeant Schreiber. He went in the 80s periodically to the Soviet Union to negotiate for oil for Arm & Hammer. And I said to him, how do you go to Russia? They hate us. We hate them. Cold War. Missiles are aimed at each other. Nuclear missiles and all this stuff. I said, how do you go over there and then talk to them? And he would say to me, he says, well, you have to find some common ground. He says, so what I do is I go over there, I meet the negotiators, and we sit down for dinner, and we don't even talk about oil or about anything that I'm there for. And we just talk about our families. And he says, then when we talk about the families, I find out that he was a fisherman. And I said, well, that's interesting because I fish. Can I invite you to Hannesport and fish with me? The guy said, yeah, well, I go up. Why don't I invite you right now to go fishing with me tomorrow? And they went fishing in Russia at some lake. And then all of a sudden, this is by day 2, they have now fished, they've talked about the families, they've drunk the vodka, and they've eaten the caviar and all this kind of stuff and lived it up. And now they started talking about the oil. He says it was like butter. The conversation was easy. They got the rights to the drilling of oil over there and all of this stuff. And he then invited him, this man, over to Hannesport, and they were fishing there. So the bottom line is, here's 2 countries that hate each other, but he found a way through communication to get in there and to make everyone kind of understand the other side. And so this is exactly what this is here. It's communication. It's the way we deal with the other side, the way we talk about the other side. One thing we know for sure is to accusing each other, them calling us losers and we calling them losers. No, it's not going to solve the issue.
Talking past each other.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that it is a very complicated issue. And we have to even include evolutionary experts.
What do you mean by that?
Well, it's because we know that the human race has always been prejudiced. I mean, remember that there used to be like, I don't know, 18 or 20 human races, and the rest of them were all wiped out. Why? Because of prejudice, because of insecurities and hate and all of this kind of thing. So I think that, you know, and what we have to do is figure out, how does the brain really work? Why is the brain functioning this way? And then how do we go and reduce that problem?
That's really interesting. So you want to approach this from a neurological standpoint,
From every standpoint.
scientific standpoint.
From every standpoint, from a scientific standpoint, from a medical standpoint, from a communication standpoint, that there's so many different angles that you have to use. So if you really want to get rid of a problem, you cannot look at the problem in a one-dimensional way. You have to look at it in a multidimensional thing. And this is why I think a university is such a great place to have an event like this, like today, because that's where they study all this stuff. So we have to eventually include someone that is an expert in evolution and see what is the part of the brain and how does the brain really work and how can you diffuse that. And so those are the kind of issues we want to get into. I'm really interested in that. As you know, I'm always interested in trying to figure out and to solve a problem. I mean, people always will come and say it's impossible to do, but there's no such thing as impossible. I mean, I've heard impossible my whole life. You know, it's impossible to come to America. It's impossible to be a world champion in bodybuilding. It's impossible to be a leading man. It's impossible to become governor if you're not into politics and blah, blah, blah. I heard this impossible all my life. So I think this is also one of those things where people say it's impossible, but I think it is possible if we make an effort.
I want to go back to what the story you told about Sergeant Shriver. And obviously you took that and you used it in your political career because you had to, because you were a Republican in California in order to get things done. But there are people who are going to hear that and say, we shouldn't even talk. If somebody is that full of hate, they don't deserve our attention. They don't deserve to be engaged with. And what do you say to that?
Well, that sounds good if they can prove to me that that worked. If anyone shows to me that it worked, not to talk to the other side, then I would say, let's go all the way with that. But it didn't. Nothing yet has been accomplished. And so also one has to study, by the way, what effect in the social media has, because it's another new phenomenon where people find their echo chambers there and they will agree with them and all this stuff. So there's a lot of, like I said, there's a lot of ways of approaching this issue, but the important thing is not to go and say, oh, this is an easy one to lick, let's just not talk to the other side.
Because you brought that up, how much have you thought about trying to talk to the executives at social media companies? Because you're exactly right. So much of this is exacerbated by what people see online, and what people see online, there's an algorithm that feeds whatever they have already looked at. And so if you looked at one thing that has to do with hate or prejudice, then the algorithm feeds so much more of that. So it makes it so much worse. There are people in Washington have talking about it, but I don't see that happening. Can you use your platform?
Yes,
there?
absolutely. Here's the thing, I'm not an expert in it. So we need, again, an expert
makes two
in
of
that particular subject of what power social media has. But I know for sure it has a lot of power in that direction. And I think that it's why it is important that we use every angle. And that's why I also think it is so important that we have every famous director here. And I'll tell you why. Think about the power movies have. I mean, it is staggering. Remember when 3 Mile Island came out, the movie about the 3 Mile Island, and all of a sudden the whole world stopped the development of nuclear plants. Big mistake. But that's the power it had. One movie. Or when you talk about, those John Travolta movies, Saturday Night Fever. I mean, there is no government that would have had the power of that movie. If every government in the world would have said, we're going to go and create discotheques, an increase of 50% of discotheques, no one would have gone to go dancing. But that one movie created in my village, I grew up in a village called Tal. There were 800 people living there. They built a discotheque. And we all went to that discotheque.
I want photos.
I mean, it's wild, I tell you.
Did you wear the full John Travolta outfit?
I didn't have the money to wear that, so I came with just shorts. And I was pumped up. I just used baby oil to look good. But the bottom line was just to show to you that one movie that created thousands and tens of thousands of discotheques all over the world because of one movie. And there's endless amount of stories. I remember when Conan the Barbarian came out, one of my movies, and Terminating was, people started looking at the body on the screen and they all started working out. We could have pushed the bodybuilding thing for decades. It didn't have the impact that TV shows and movies had. Then Stallone came in and Van Damme and all those guys, and all of a sudden there was a huge boom in the world when it comes to weight training. So this is the impact. And this is why I think you maybe see Turtle Top. Oh, there's another guy in here. It's not another guy in here. Very, very powerful. He's a really brilliant writer and brilliant director. And so this is what he's going to talk about here. And I don't know exactly what he's going to talk about, but I mean, I know he's going to address the power that we have through movies and through writing, script writing and all of this stuff. So we have to, the reason I'm mentioning is because it's just, there's so many angles. We have to kind of use angles that the other side doesn't always expect. And then all of a sudden they find it appealing and they go in that direction. And so this is, I think, government has a difficult time with all of those kind of issues, as you know. I mean, they cannot even fix the gun control issue. Those idiots in Sacramento or in Washington. I mean, you have 90% of the people say, yeah, we need to have background checks, and they can't get it done. Think about that. That's why they have in Washington, Congress has a 20% approval rating. which is, of course, worse than the approval rating of herpes of Fidel Castro. May I remind you, okay? So, but I mean, that's how sad it is. So they can't fix anything. So this is why I think we are sitting here, because we have to say, okay, government is not going to fix those problems. We have to. You know, people have to go and get together and fix those problems.
I feel like I need to do a fact check on the herpes. Because
But it sounded good.
it sounded good because I'm pretty sure herpes had a lower approval rating than 20%.
No, I don't think so.
You don't think so?
Well, I
There
don't
are
know. I'm not
20%
an
of
expert
people
in
who are
herpes, but I mean,
pro-herpes.
I'm just trying to tell you that it is
All right.
the
I
latest
just
rating.
know.
So, well, let's check it out. Let's
Yeah,
do some
let's
fact
we're
checking.
gonna-
Ketchel, do some fact checking. Okay.
Okay, back to the topic at hand, which is, it's good to have levity because, we all know
I
why.
love that you got stuck with this herpes thing. It's like,
That is very
yeah, but I mean,
specific.
is there something you want to tell us?
No,
Okay.
definitely not. No breaking news here. But I do want to go back to something that Dean Bay said about the Anti-Defamation League, because they tracked. You were talking about California. If you look at the national incidents, 3,697 incidents of assault, harassment, and vandalism against Jews just in 2022. And again, that was the largest number since the ADL started tracking this. We talked a little bit about social media, but just more generally, why do you think hate and even specifically anti-Semitism is on the rise as it is now?
I'm not an expert in.
But you're an observer of
I'm a
society and culture.
I think that there's probably a lot of different reasons. And I think that it's very clear that the more liberal we go with social issues, you see the other side becoming more and more angry, and there's more and more hate in general. There's the people that created the insurrection and went absolutely berserk in Washington on January 6th. And there's just so many people that are angry, not just angry about whites against blacks, against people against Jews and all this, but angry in general. I mean, just watch people when they drive. I mean, I'm Mandible Canyon. I see people stopping at the stop sign there or just zipping through when I come out of my street. And you can see them. This woman the other day, she was like stopping them. I mean, she was pissed off. I mean, imagine this is now 6:30 in the morning and she's already so angry. And so this is what's going on. And so anything can make that person blow up. So I don't know what the reasons are for all of this, but I think we have to figure out a way of toning it down. And this is one of the reasons why I have my daily newsletter. I literally started it to help people with their fitness and with their, losing weight and to feel better about themselves. But I realized that everyone said it was the only positive thing on social media. So I think we can use social media and really do the opposite that is going on right now, and to really kind of feed the social media with positive reinforcement. People just love it. The amount, I'm just giving them, I mean, just think about it. I mean, all I do is someone writes to us and says, okay, I can get out of bed. What do I do? So, I give them a simple solution, what I think is wrong, which is I say, you have no purpose maybe to get up. Find a mission, find a reason. I said, when I get up, my mission is to feed the animals. So it's a simple kind of a thing that I come up with. I'm not a psychologist or anything, but the reaction I get is, thank you so much. You helped me so much to get out of bed. And I finally found a purpose. I said, I have to go to work. And it goes on and on and on for a simple thing. It's just people just love when they finally have someone say something positive. And so to me, I found out, and this is not something that was my goal in life. And this is what's really interesting about life. My goal was, when I was 15 years old, to be a bodybuilding champion, the greatest bodybuilder of all times, and to come to America and to get into movies and to become rich and famous. That's it. But not in my wildest dreams did I ever think about that one day I would be running for governor And they will become governor of the 5th largest economy in the world. And that one day that I will be fighting for the environment. And that one day I will be sitting here talking about hate and prejudice. This is stuff, this is kind of like, or that I will become a motivational speaker and will have motivational suggestions on my newsletters and all that. So this is all stuff, this is kind of new for me, but it all is part of what my father always said to me, be useful. This is the first thing I always said every morning when I got up. Just remember, son, be useful. And so this has been on the back of my mind continuously, to be useful, you know, and to go out and to help the world, not just to think about myself. You know, when you're like 18, it's all about me. But then when you get older, it's about we. And so this is what I've basically done. I've started thinking about the bigger issues and how do we help the world with this. And this is one of the issues that I'm involved with.
We are out of time, but I have one last question. You are obviously, you just described it, a very goal-oriented person. You told me once that what you do is you picture in your mind what you want to attain. So on this effort, what's that picture in your mind? What is success?
I'm absolutely convinced that we can make an impact if we all work together and if we find the right way to go, how to go about it. Absolutely. I'm as much as I was 50 years ago, they were laughing at me 50 years ago when I said, one day there will be more gymnasiums where people will be working out daily than there will be grocery stores or supermarkets. They were going exactly. Check it out. There's more gyms now than there's supermarkets and grocery stores. Exactly. It took 50 years. It's not from one day to the next. You know, now, then people thought of bodybuilding as narcissists, homosexuals. You're overcompensating for some shortcomings. And all of this, you must be stupid. And all of this kind of stereotypical things. Now today, everyone is working out. And they're using not only working out for, you know, kind of slowing down the aging process and all of this kind of things, but also for therapy after you have orthopedic surgery and all of this stuff. Weight resistance training is being used for everything. So this is the kind of things that we've gone to through communication. And this is where communication comes in. Why I'm a fanatic about, when I was a kid, I learned how to be a salesperson. I went to apprentice school, how to be a salesperson. And so since then, I know that communication of selling an idea or marketing an idea is so important. And I remember that in bodybuilding, the biggest breakthrough was when we stopped using the word bodybuilding. Because everyone thought when you said bodybuilding, you want to be the guy on stage that wants to flex. But they didn't understand it has just to do with just getting in shape with weight resistance training. So we just stopped to use the word of bodybuilding. We said weight resistance training or progressive weight resistance training or cross training, fitness training, and all this kind of other words we used, but we didn't use bodybuilding, and boom, there was an explosion. All of a sudden there was a breakthrough. And so the same thing is with this. Everything we just have to find. We are right now in the beginning. We are the only group that really is dealing with this, may I remind you, because everyone is just the same thing. Let's accuse the other side and let's attack the other side. And we know they're wrong and we are right and all this stuff. Let's assume for a second they're wrong and they're right. We all know that. But how is it going to help us? How do we move the needle forward? So this is why we have to get into it and have this multi kind of dimensional approach to the whole thing. And I think when I say that we can have an impact, I mean it, and you will see the outcome of that. I think that we can do a great job with all that if we all work together.
Governor, thank you.
It was technically gonorrhea that was
Yeah.
that gonorrhea was more popular than Congress rather than herpes. It's a big, big issue.
I'm just glad I didn't run that poll. Thank you, Dana. Thank you, Governor. Our next panel actually continues the theme of reaching across. The title of the panel is Reaching, Not Preaching, Breaking the Extremist Mindset. And the panel will be led by Professor Southers from the Price School for Public Policy. So, Professor.
Thank you very much. So welcome, everyone. I'm Erroll Southers, and I'm Associate Senior Vice President here at the University for Safety and Risk Assurance, and also a professor at the Price School. And I want to first thank a couple of friends before I introduce my very esteemed panelists. You know, one, I've known Arnold, as he mentioned, for over 40 years, and he's always raised the bar, and literally. And I've had the privilege and if you will, the luxury of being able to talk to him anytime I want and stop by his house and ask for advice. So, by the way, what he didn't tell you about all that time in the life cycle, it did pay off. 5 bodybuilding titles later, after I'm in the gym one day and getting ready for another show, and he says, "Yeah, you look good." And the thing about him, he's always brutally honest, just like today. He said, "You look good," but he says, "Early, you've won a lot of titles, but you never won the Mr. Universe." So I said, "Okay, all right, I can live with that." But I do want to just let you know, when he talks about going across the aisle and talking to people, we started an after-school program called Arnold's All-Stars, and they told him it couldn't be done here in LA. So he went to the LA Unified School District and said, "Give me the 4 most challenged middle schools you have." And we went there. And the biggest problem we had was the teacher said it's not safe. The kids said they can't get home. He said, "We can do this." "Well, what are your rules going to be?" "Well, the parents have to pick the kids up every day." Not going to do that. We started the program, got LAPD on board, got the LA sheriffs on board. The kids came, parents picked them up every day. We decided to go outside the box, and who was our challenge in that neighborhood? It was gang members. Arnold said, "Let's hire former gang members to be security." We did that. We never had a problem. So it is about going across the aisle and talking to people. So I want to thank you for everything you've done in my life. I want to thank you for being here today and taking on this incredible challenge. So with that, of course, after his YouTube went viral, I get a call from Conyers, and I know exactly what he's going to say to me. "Arnold wants to do something." I go, "Oh, God." And I dare ask when. He says, "Next month." And I say, "Well, that's April, commencement's in May." I said, "There's not a venue on this campus that's available for another year." But I have one friend that has never said no, and that is Dean Bay. And I want to thank you for allowing us to be here today, knowing how challenging it is to be on campus right now, but how important this is. Just thank you and your staff for always opening your door when we have events like this and just welcoming us today. So with that, my panelists, Miriam Churchill, who interestingly enough, I've worked with for many years, and we finally met in person for the first time yesterday. She's from Morocco via Paris, and now lives in Boston. She's the executive director of Parents for Peace, and I'll let her tell you that story. She's overseen the creation, development, and implementation of a helpline for individuals worried about loved ones falling into extremism, and that's how we met. She's led numerous interventions with families and individuals across the extremist ideology spectrum from around the world. And so, Miriam, if I could welcome you to the stage, please. And we talk about going across the aisle. I've been on the board of a group called Life After Hate, and Chuck Leek is an exit specialist, and I'm going to let Chuck tell you what that's all about. But he's also a former extremist. And I always have to pause, since I have a Jewish wife and daughter, when I tell them I have former neo-Nazis who are people I work with. But it really is about going across the aisle. He was actively involved in the white supremacist groups for over 15 years. In fact, Chuck was connected to an individual who we'll talk about today, who, when I was an FBI agent in San Diego, we used to work cases on him in San Diego. He began in the 1980s and became sympathetic to their beliefs for more than 20 years, in fact, including a stint in the United States military, which he'll talk about. In 2011, he was introduced to Life After Hate and started to change his thinking about the ideology. And now he works as an exit specialist with a number of folks that we work in a number of different extremist ideologies to get them off that pathway to radicalization and out of the movement. So Chuck Leek, if you'll join me on stage. Okay, so Miriam, I'm going to start with you and ask you a really simple question of how you got here.
So first of all, thank you. This is such an honor to be with you in this panel, Dr. Southers. I very much appreciate you and with my colleague, Chuck from Life After Hate. I've been the executive director of Parents for Peace since 2016, and I'm also a first responder. I was born in Casablanca, and my father is an African Muslim, and my mother is a white French Christian. So being born into a biracial family made it very complicated to be me in the 70s. And I have experienced firsthand what it is like to be a target of hate. From my two backgrounds, I even suffered from anti-Semitism. I'm not even Jewish. The people that would throw rocks at me very regularly would call me Jew burn in hell. I can still hear that. That's what PTSD does to a person. And according to them, being a half Muslim, a half Christian made me a Jew. You know, it's always very interesting to hear the complexity and the humor of that situation. So, I will spare you the horrific detail of my childhood. But early age, I find out that racism has no color and hatred is unequal opportunity. And being a survivor of violence, I became obsessed with the question, why people hurt themselves and hurt others? Why is that? So this obsession led me to get an MED in counseling psychology. And a very early experience in my profession was actually to work in the street of Marseille, to be young counselor for young women and boys that were being groomed into sex workers. I worked with people with mental illness and addiction. And I had no idea that this early experience would lead me to understanding the grooming of vulnerable people into extremism and how crucial it is to take a public health approach.
Well, thank you. Chuck, I want to ask you, tell us a little bit about the person that we have here today. And if you would then move into what got you into this field.
Yeah, so I was actually born and raised here in Los Angeles. My dad was Tommy Trojan in 1964. I moved to San Diego in 1986 when I joined the military, and I drifted into a skinhead circle there. Was introduced to, well, I had been exposed to, white supremacist and neo-Nazi imagery and terminology through most of my childhood growing up here in LA. But then in San Diego, I met people who were active neo-Nazis and I fell in with that ideology. I was involved with a group called White Aryan Resistance, which was Tom Metzger's group, which is who Dr. Southers was talking about. And I spent about 15 years involved in that stuff directly, nearly 20 sympathetic to it. I actually left in around the year 2000. And at the time, there were no groups like Life After Hate or Parents for Peace. So I basically went through the steps of disengagement and de-radicalization on my own. I was fortunate enough around 2011 at a point where I was really kind of developing a completely different identity to meet a guy named Frank Mink, who he's loosely who the story of American History X was based off of. We started talking, and about that same time, him and a number of other former extremists formed the Life After Hate organization. I've been volunteering with them since then, since 2011, and then I'd been asking them the whole time, hey, find me a job, find me something I could do, you know. And then I was fortunate enough back in May of last year that a spot opened up as an exit specialist, which is, yeah, you know, I mean, that's not my favorite term in the world. What it really is a peer mentor. So I work with individuals who are leaving hate groups or thinking about leaving hate groups, just to kind of try and help them, you know, navigate the experience. Like, let them know, hey, you know, I've been where you are. You can get out of it. You can change your life, and society will accept you again. You will be able to find a purpose, and you will be able to have a constructive life.
Oh, thank you. And if you haven't seen American History X, I highly recommend it. When I was teaching my course on extremism here, I used to show it every semester. And what was really disturbing was the fact that many people hadn't seen it, as it is with many films that we have here. But it is a very powerful film about Edward Norton plays the lead, and he's here in LA, and he becomes a neo-Nazi, and he recruits his little brother. And it's really powerful. It takes place at Venice High School. And there's an incredible scene in there at a dinner table where his mom is dating a Jewish man. And I would show that scene to my class each semester, and it's just incredibly powerful. So Miriam, we met because you introduced me to the parents of a young man who was incarcerated after going into a recruiting station and shooting 2 military servicemen there and getting arrested and convicted and sentenced. Tell us about the work you do with Parents for Peace with people like that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So when I met Mr. Bledsoe, he, his son, became very anti-Semitic, and it was a shock, and didn't know what was going on. And he was actually groomed on campus. So his groomer sent him in Yemen and came back and committed a terrorist crime. And so in 2016, when I joined, he said, look, Miriam, if this is happening to my son, this must happen to other people's son and daughter. Can you please find out? So, before being an expert, I think that we have to find out and ask the question. So for about a year, I traveled in different places in the United States, in Canada, in Europe, in Northern Africa. And I spoke to all those families. Like Arnold said, talk to the people, go meet them. And speaking, what I wanted to find out is the root issue of what get them being radicalized. And I asked questions about who were they before they were hateful, what happened, what did you find out? Tons of questions. Then I met people that were terrorists incarcerated, and also I met former supremacists from different ideology. We take an agnostic approach because we work with Islamists and white supremacists, because they are actually in the United States, they are the lead hateful groups that equally target Jews and scapegoat Jews. So when I interviewed all those people for this year, I came back home with tons of information, and I realized something important is that a successful radicalization happened when families are isolated by shame and fear and a lack of help and resources. People that are radicalized, their groomers isolate them from their families and communities. That makes a successful radicalization. So it became very clear that we had to bridge that gap. And so we launched the helpline for that in 2016 with Parents for Peace. And we have given, we've been, so we don't do mental health, but we do coaching and mentoring. Let me give you a specific example of the helpline, for people that are not familiar with this work. We had a family that were very worried about a son that was increasingly being anti-Semitic and hateful, and he was very public with that. The community was also very much worried. So what we did is we did a short assessment, and we found out that this young man was heavily drinking, that there was some mental illness going on. We could see that he was having guns, and the house was filled with guns as well. He was actually aiming a synagogue. So what we did is we coached the family to call the law enforcement, because a combination of alcohol and hate and mental illness is really a bad combination. So you need to know that families don't call the cops on their kids. So we need to work with them and to help them get there. And what I explain is that you don't want to be in the first page of the newspaper. It's better to kind of do things in preventive ways so we can do something about that. It turned out that actually he was in the list of the FBI. So, so the knock on the door from the FBI took his guns. We convinced the family to secure all the guns in the house and please turn off the TV and the news because it hits the whole thing. We helped the family to set boundaries so he get treatment, and he did, and to get evaluated, psych evaluation. Arnold is right. This issue is complex. It's about the brain, understanding the brain, understand youth, understand grief, understand, how hurts can hurt other people. And so by doing so this takes a while. I'm not going to pretend to say that this is like a short thing, but it took a while. But we had like a successful story. This is an example of what we do at Parents for Peace. And to know that even the messiest situation, change is possible and healing is possible. One last thing I want to say about the work is that hearing Arnold speak actually made a lot of sense, because in the 80s, I remember very well when HIV was a political problem, it was a messy problem, it was a moral problem, and as a result, the virus spread harder and killed many more of us, and that traumatized me. I did actually my thesis on that. And for the 7 years, my team would hear me complain, because I would say, in the 80s, what happened is when Elizabeth Taylor stood up and spoke about this messy issue and had the courage to talk about how it was affecting her own family, we were able to be inspired and to change this messy issue into a public health issue. That's why today these young people don't have to deal with these things that traumatized us in the 80s. And my team would always kind of say, you're complaining, where is our Elizabeth Taylor of the 80s? Why don't we have a celebrity that can help us change that very difficult situation into something that's, a public health, where people come out and ask for help? And when my team showed me the video, I just couldn't believe that. They said, you found the Elizabeth Taylor about extremism. So thank you for that. And I agree that in order to make a big change, celebrity can help us, just like Elizabeth Taylor did. And this is very encouraging.
Well, you said two very interesting things, and we've talked about this. The French have been looking at the whole issue of extremism as a public health problem and not a national security or law enforcement problem. The other thing you mentioned is that parents don't call the police on their kids. So I've done a lot of work in Minneapolis at a time when that became a focal point for Al-Shabaab when they were recruiting. And then years later when ISIS, when they were recruiting, which was an incredible dynamic, here ISIS was recruiting Somalians to go to fight in a country that they didn't even grow up in. And it was successful. And I looked at a group from Berlin, similar to Life After Hate, with regards to how they were getting families involved in de-radicalization or removing people out of the movement. So Chuck, if you would talk a little bit about that process and talk about Life After Hate.
Sure. So Life After Hate is, we work with adult clients only. We do not work with mandated clients. So the people that come to us voluntarily. And so we seek first to get a commitment from them to nonviolence, to eschew violence as an alternative to, we look for disengagement, getting them to leave the circle of friends they have behind, the social group. And further down the road, once we get the commitment to nonviolence and we get them disengaged from the social network and the groups and online network, then if they're still looking for this, we will work on de-radicalization with them to change their mindset, change what they feel politically, change how they see and view the world. And so this is, there is a broad spectrum of a problem here, you know, and it's honestly, these groups are symptomatic of an issue that is systemic. It's not, you know, they aren't the problem themselves. It's a systemic issue that is the problem. White supremacist groups are a symptom of that. It's a malignant symptom. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to minimize it. It's something that needs to be addressed. And, you know, one thing we say at Life After Hate is that our ultimate goal is to put ourselves out of work, right? We don't want to have to be doing this. So we work with clients. Life After Hate has been in existence since 2011. Over the last 2 or 3 years, there have been some pretty significant strides in the way we're doing things. We've created what has kind of been coined a multidisciplinary team. We have a psychologist running our program. She's a registered licensed psychologist. We have multiple master's level social workers who work directly with the clients. And then we have a number of peer mentors like myself who also work directly with clients. So it's a team approach, and they talk to all of us, and we all kind of collaborate on where they're at, what their social needs are. So the social workers in this are a huge component. I can't tell you how, like, when the social workers came in, Life After Hate changed exponentially, and the good we're doing and the results we're seeing has become so much greater because the social workers can put them in touch with services that no one in my position, I don't know anything about psychology. I don't know anything about social work. I can talk to people about my experience and how it relates to their experience, but I don't know how to find people educational opportunities or employment opportunities or counseling. That's not, I just don't have the skills for that. And for a long time, Life After Hate was just former extremists. Now that we have this multidisciplinary team, the results we're seeing are, like I said, exponentially greater than what they were in the past. And we're seeing, you know, people really truly change their lives. And so I just, I'm very grateful to see the growth that has happened. I'm very grateful to Arnold for the video that he put out. I watched it a couple of times over the last week preparing to come here. And I just want to say that I was very struck with the poignancy of it. It spoke the kind of message that, you know, these people need to hear. It's not us versus them. It's not, you know, you are cut off from society forever. It's you're living a lifestyle that is harmful more than it is to everybody else in the world. It's harmful to yourself. You know, you're hurting yourself as much or more as everybody else, and you can and should change. And I really appreciate that.
Well, no, thank you, Chuck. And again, what I mentioned earlier about Arnold is he's never sugarcoated anything, and it is about being honest. And we've watched this country pivot now over the last 2 decades. The people in our discipline, we have seen this coming since Oklahoma City, and everybody's ignored it. The data is overwhelming with regards to what the threat is all about. I feel like Tom Cruise talking to Jack Nicholson in the courtroom about people can't handle the truth, and that's what it's really all about. So we understand what this threat is. So let me just ask you as a final question, because the people used to ask me what keeps you up at night whenever I would do panels, and I'd go on with this long diatribe. What keeps me up at night now is the violent overthrow of this country. And I'm just being brutally honest. Thank you, Arnold. I'm just being brutally honest. But I'm going to ask you two, if with all the work you do and all the things that you see, if you could talk about one thing, tell us what's missing so we can move past this point of being stuck on denial.
Yeah, I mean, I wish if I had just one thing that you say that is missing, but first of all, the biggest gap, the biggest gap that we need to bridge is that to stop politicizing such a complicated things because it makes it worse. What is missing is we are not making families comfortable to step and to talk, to ask for help because they are terrified to be called racist. We've got to stop insulting each other and working together, putting the politics aside and coming together, because extremism is not just white supremacy, it's Islamists. We have many of that, and it's increasing. What keeps me up at night is that when our small team, we are happy that we are doing effective work, but our team need to be tripled. And what keeps me awake is that the fear of having a waiting list, that a family is not being helped. What does that mean if this family, there's guns, there's all that stuff and cannot be helped because our team is too small, and it's very hard to get the financial support to grow. What we do, because Life After Hate and Parents for Peace cannot resolve this problem on our own. We need a lot more, and we have to be honest about that.
Thank you. Chuck, what are we missing?
Funding. Simple as that. I mean, that's not it. What we're missing, I don't know, societally, I think that we're missing each other's humanity. The dehumanization across the spectrum, and you see it in the blue side as well as the red side, and more than that, you see it globally. People want to blame their own problems on somebody else because it's easier than looking at yourself. I'm a living example of that. When I was involved with these things, when I wanted to commit genocide, the person I really hated was me. I hated myself. And I couldn't cope with that. It wasn't even a rational thought, but I turned that hate out on the world because I didn't know what else to do with it, and it took a lot of work to change that. And, I've had a world of opportunities open up to me. I have a wonderful partner. I'm Christian, she's Muslim, and life is just so much more enriching and fulfilling when I'm not like trying to blame all the things that I feel are problems in my life on the world, instead of recognizing where it is in me that the problem is,
Yeah.
So with that, Miriam Churchill, Chuck Leek, thank you for your commitment. Thank you for your service. Thank you for believing that we can change the paradigm. And ladies and gentlemen, another round of applause for Miriam and Chuck.
Thank you, Erroll.
Thank you, Professor Southers, Ms. Churchill, and Mr. Leek. And as Arnold noted, stories, movies in this case, can reach millions, if not billions, bringing about real sustained change. And that will be the subject of our next panel in many ways. Titled Fighting Hate with Storytelling and Effective Communication, that panel will be led once again by Dana Bash. Thank you.
Hi again. So I would like to bring up here Rabbi Sharon Bruss. Where are you? Oh, there you are. Who is the senior and founding rabbi of IKAR, a Jewish community. You can come on up. A Jewish community that launched in 2004 to reinvigorate Jewish practice and inspire people of faith to reclaim a soulful, justice-driven voice. And also, as we've also heard about, a famous director, John Turteltaub, who has been a leading producer and director in hit movies over the past 30 years, known for hit films like Three Ninjas, Cool Runnings, While You Were Sleeping, Phenomenon, and it goes on and on and on and on and on. So thank you. Thank you, both of you.
Thank you.
So Rabbi, I want to start with you because we were chatting beforehand and you said something that I agree with, which is, let's just sort of go back to the baseline, which is, can you define what anti-Semitism is?
Sure. And let me just say, I'm really honored to be here, and I so deeply appreciate the framing of this conversation. This is a conversation about anti-Semitism that's framed as a conversation about breaking the cycle of extremism. So from the outset, we're treating anti-Semitism as a form of racism that operates in coordination with other forms of racism, including anti-Black racism, including anti-immigrant racism, all forms of extremism, anti-trans hatred, homophobia, etc. One of the problems with anti-Semitism is that we don't really define the terms very well. And while anti-Semitism is a form of racism, it does function differently from all of those other forms, some of which I just mentioned. And so I think that people bring misperception about what it is, and it often leaves people, including Jews, confused about what's happening. And is that anti-Semitic or not? Maybe you watched a monologue or a movie and you thought, I don't know, was that anti-Semitic? I can't tell. So what anti-Semitism is a conspiracy theory that Jews hold disproportionate power and therefore are a dangerous and nefarious force in society. There are several anti-Semitic lies that are really at the heart of this conspiracy theory: that Jews control the media, that Jews control the banks, and that Jews control government are three of the top. If you listen to some of our Congress people today, they'll tell you Jews control the weather too, and space lasers and all kinds of other things. But these are really insidious lies, because what they indicate is that they see a presence of Jews in all of these spaces. And there certainly are. As I say, some of my best friends and my husband are Jews in Hollywood, but that doesn't mean that Jews run Hollywood. And so what these lies indicate is that Jews hold disproportionate power over the way that we think, over the way that our economies function, and over the way that our governments function. And that's a very helpful framing for people who feel powerless, who feel dispossessed, who feel like the world has passed them by, because there's a very simple answer to the world's problems. That's the people who hold the presumed power. And that's where things start to get very dangerous. And that this is the cosmology of classic European anti-Semitism that ultimately led to and manifested in the genocide of our people in living memory. There are obviously many different forms of anti-Semitism, but this is the dominant and the most dangerous form, and the one that I'm most concerned about seeing the reemergence of in the United States over the course of the last 7 or 8 years.
And you mentioned, and you just said this, but I just want to underscore the difference in the prejudice against Jews and, let's say, against Blacks, is that people think that Jews are superior, and the prejudice and the racism historically in this country has been the opposite when it comes to Black Americans. What do you see as your job as a storyteller, as somebody who has such incredible power with what you do in Hollywood?
Well, first of all, this day is amazing. And I can tell you, I've listened to this woman many times and has changed my life. And you're in tough competition now with Arnold, because this is our role model, this man, right? And he's been there. Yes, the Austrian thing and all of that, but just our country, Republican, Democrat, the minute he announced he was running as a Republican, half of California hated the man, right? He didn't have to do anything except say that. And we quickly ran to that place. We didn't listen. We didn't hear what he had to say. We just assumed he's a terrible, awful human being, right? He's one of the most incredible human beings I've ever known in my life. You know, the anti-Semitism thing, I think, is very interesting. When people say Jews run Hollywood, they're kind of right. There are a lot of Jews running Hollywood. But when they say the Jews run Hollywood, now I have a problem. Because there's this belief in this conspiracy theory that there's this notion of connectedness and that they're all part of this group, right? That's also what makes it different than other prejudices, right? We don't think of other ethnic groups as this, they're having secret meetings somewhere and deciding how to be that, right? This is a whole separate thing. I wish it were true. I'd go talk to them and get more stuff. And it doesn't exist. I'd want to be on the committee. It doesn't exist. As storytellers, you know, it's a phenomenal thing. This is how we have communicated for centuries, and we tell fables, right? Morality plays. Every movie's a morality play, and there's always a message and a theme, and even every sitcom you've ever seen, there's a little issue, and at the end, Webster says, I guess honesty is the best policy. And we all feel we've learned something, and it sets a tone. Hollywood as we know it, I think, the movies we all see, it's going away. The internet has taken over, right? Nobody goes to the movies anymore, really? Movies will be gone soon. Sorry. And at home, it's a different thing. It's not the same. It's not a universal voice. And I'm very concerned with who is expressing and telling the story from now on. Everything has been so democratized, if I can use that term, that everybody's given the exact same weight as everybody else, right? That didn't used to be the case, right? The right ideas were preached. Now, we have to give equal time to the horrible people just so you can hear their side. It's terrible, right? So I don't know how Hollywood's going to deal with that. We liked that role, right? We felt we were making the world a better place. It's one of the reasons you go into this. I don't know what the future holds. Sorry to be depressing.
No, but I hear what you're saying about it being democratized. I think you're talking about like anybody can go on YouTube and say something or use other platforms. But there still is a core. If you want to see, even if you're not going to the movie theater, if you want to see good storytelling, you'll watch one of your streamers and you'll watch one of your shows or one of the governor's shows. And so it does still exist. You do still have the power to put ideas out there of good, of right, of sort of correcting social ills.
And the way you do that is what Arnold said, and I think Sharon knows this better than anyone. As someone who gives a sermon, yelling at people and telling them how terrible they are doesn't help, right? You bring them in, you enlist them to be part of the solution. What Arnold has been saying is what works, solve the problem. Face it. Now, when you make movies and TV shows, your executives at the studio will tell you, don't make your show into medicine, right? No one wants to go to that. And you got to make money. So if you're going to yell at people, they're not going to watch it. So you have to include them, bring them out, reach across, find the humanity in everybody and bring that out. And I think stories do that well because you can give an objective person, right? This isn't someone you know, it's a pretend person. Right. And you can live through that and learn your lessons that way.
I want to say something about story also. Thank you for that, John. I think the question is, what are the stories that we're choosing to tell right now? And can we be daring enough to actually tell a different story about the time that we're living in? The fact that you stood up here this morning and introduced yourself saying that you were the son of a Nazi was an incredible act of courage. Now, we all know this because we've all read this in the paper, but that you identify that as a central part of your story that you're not going to hide and you're not going to hold shame for anymore. And you mentioned shame in the previous panel. I think this is so critical. The three pieces, Miriam, that you said it, shame, fear, and isolation, along with financial disadvantage are what lead people into extremism. How do we tell a narrative that allows people to move away from shame, which never leads to anything good? I'm an Ashkenazi Jew, so I think guilt serves a very important purpose in our lives, but shame does not. And so how do we tell a story that allows us to own the truth, but not feel ashamed of it. And I think what you just described in your relationship with Simon, the two of you finding a way to weep together at Auschwitz and not hold shame, but instead hold the grace to know that together you could tell a different story. That's the kind of narrative that we need. The greatest story, in my opinion, that the Jewish people have ever told is the story of the Exodus from Egypt. It's the very heart of the Torah. 4 of the 5 books of the Torah are about it. We cycle the whole year around this story. And I keep finding these eternal messages in it, like the fact that Sforno, this medieval commentator, Jewish commentator, said that the plagues on Egypt, the 10 plagues, were not designed to punish the Egyptians, but to awaken them to the fact that they were oppressing another people and could be part of the redemption narrative if they chose to. There was room for them to join in the path to liberation. And I think part of the problem that we're experiencing in America today and globally, because we all know that there's this, ultra-nationalist, illiberal trend around the world, is that the people who have traditionally held power don't want to let go of it. The people who've been powerless are demanding liberation and oppression from oppression. And we have not told a story that creates a big enough dreamscape for us to imagine that those two can walk together, that you can be part of the redemption story, that you can be part of the redemption story, that all of us can. And so I actually really appreciate the democratization of storytelling in our time, because it allows all these other voices to rise to the surface that might not have had room before. The question for me is, are we going to be brave enough to imagine a different kind of narrative in which we see not a zero-sum game in which your rise to power means my reduction in power? If more Blacks and Latinos are voting, that means that, my traditional holding as a white landowner from the South is going to go down. But instead, we together collectively can create a different kind of society. And that's the kind of courage that I know that storytellers need to have in order to help us imagine a different kind of future.
Is that possible?
It's absolutely, ask
Oh,
Arnold if
Well,
it's possible.
well, I mean,
Everything
everything
is
is a
possible.
storytelling
But what-
space.
Yes, and but as Arnold said, it's a lot of things all at once, and that's possible at a time, right? You said something very interesting, which is it's about yourself. This is one of those issues that it's not about other people fixing. You have to do it, right? It's yourself first. When Arnold talks about how angry everyone is, right? That's all of us. And that anger, when it's validated by a group, suddenly feels great, right? Even a great group, right? Just look at sports teams. Nothing could matter less than that. And look how violent and crazy people get over that, because you have a team and an enemy and all of that, and you're told how great you are. So you got to start with yourself, right? Now, what's awesome, if I can stay on point of storytelling, is those best stories you feel you're being spoken to personally, right? You see yourself in that. You see the similar emotions, the needs, the fear of that. And fear, oh my gosh, fear is so much of this. And the more you see someone be bold and win, it gives you courage to be bold. The more you see someone, even harder than bold, is sacrifice and win. I don't think we're in a very sacrificey society right now, right? We're in a very heavy look at me, I'm a winner society right now. But when giving becomes the reward, we can change that.
It's so well said. It is true. It all starts from within. It all starts with how you as an individual feel. Because, you were talking about it earlier, that once you let go of whether you're angry at somebody or you're mad at somebody or you're taking things that are going on inside of you out on somebody else and realize what's going on, that is liberating. And it changes the whole dynamic of your relationships. And if it's done en masse, it can happen societally. One of the things I was thinking, because I know you wanted to sort of get to some of the core educational principles here. I was just in Poland last week, and I was in Warsaw for the 80th anniversary of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. And as part of that, they dedicated in the Polin Museum in Warsaw an exhibit to the Warner Brothers, to the 4 Warner Brothers. And one of the things that they said, and I didn't know this, but it makes perfect sense, is that the reason the Warner Brothers came to Hollywood and did what they did is because they couldn't get jobs anywhere else. They wanted to be lawyers. They wanted to be, the other, have businesses, and they got the doors slammed in their face because they were Jewish. So they said, oh, we'll go to Hollywood because there's nobody there and nobody's doing it, and we'll figure things out there. Back in the Middle Ages in Europe, the only reason why Jews became bankers is because the monarchy, the king, said, this is the only job you can have, Jews. And that's part of the conspiracy that has continued for hundreds and hundreds of years. So there are reasons that these conspiracies have kind of taken on lives of their own. And part of them is just because of the practicality of where they began.
Yeah, and I'd like to address 2 points here. One is the linkage specifically between anti-Semitism and anti-Black racism, because I think that this is a very important story that we don't tell enough and we don't hear enough. And I remember when sitting on my couch in Los Angeles when Charlottesville happened in 2017, and hearing them chant, "Jews will not replace us," and hearing the reporters report it as, "You will not replace us." Right. I'm sure many of us had this experience. And I thought, I know what I just heard. They did not say you, they said Jews. And I don't know why they said that. Like, what do I have to do with this Robert E. Lee statue that they're talking about removing? Anyway, and subsequently, we've learned over the course of the last several years from people like Eric Ward, who is a Black civil rights activist who actually embedded with white nationalists so that he could learn about the white nationalist ideology. He told them he was a Black nationalist, so they respected him and sort of let him into the space enough. They said, we share the same enemy, the great Satan. And he writes, I knew it. We both knew exactly what they meant by that. And the great Satan is, us, me. And so what he writes is that anti-Semitism is the beating heart of white nationalism, that anti-Black racism, because racists don't understand that Black people could actually be sophisticated enough to form their own social movements, they have to assume that the Jews are controlling the movements for social change too. And by the way, you do see a lot of Jews in movements for social change, just like you see Jews in politics and Jews in the media. But the underlying assumption is an anti-Semitic assumption. What that does, it means that in this time in which I've heard numerous white nationalists now express that the last 6 years have been beyond their wildest dreams successful in America, because they never envisioned that literally the president of the United States would equivocate in the face of white nationalism. It was always the assumption that at least publicly politicians would speak out against it. So now with this rising tide of white nationalism and anti-Semitism, I think that what often happens now is anti-Semitism starts to play the role that it often does, which is it has to be the wedge that's going to break apart what has been historically the greatest pro-democracy movement in America, which is an alliance between people on the left, largely led by Jews and by Black people, some Black Jews, and lots of other people who share those democratic values. So now anti-Semitism and anti-Black racism are linked because they're part of the same kind of racist ideology. And so anti-Semitism needs to be the thing that breaks that movement. And that's a really hard thing for people to understand. And yet, that's exactly what we saw happening after the Women's March in 2017. The stories that are written about anti-Semitism on the left, the stories that are written about the fact that we can't actually be allies and form an alliance for justice in this society are incredibly damaging. And that's why I believe we really have to tell a counter narrative, one that understands shared liberation, and that anti-Semitism is really a bellwether of any society. When anti-Semitism thrives, racism will thrive. It will rise to the surface. When Jews are targeted, all impacted communities will be vulnerable. And when there's a high amount of anti-Semitism, like we've seen in some of these recent graphs and ADL studies, what will happen is democracy will be threatened. It's not just Jews who are endangered by anti-Semitism. It's all impacted communities, all minority communities, and democracy itself. And that's something that anybody who cares about our future in this country needs to be deeply concerned about.
Well, so well said. Absolutely so well said. And
She's so much smarter than I am.
No.
It's kind of embarrassing.
you have your humor.
Yeah.
And your good looks.
Mr. Funny. Thank you.
So again, not to beat a dead horse here, but like, how do you take that and turn it into, I mean, do you think what she just said is something that you could sell to a studio? Some version of that? Could you, I mean, no, seriously, is that, because we're living in the real world and
Stories
you have
work
to be marketable.
emotional.
It has to be
That's what
marketable.
works is emotion.
Mhm.
Okay. Even an action movie that's all about, you know, getting in there and shooting everybody. It's still a visceral thing. It's not a thinky thing. There are thinky movies that are really interesting.
There's
and
a lot of emotion in what we just heard from
but
the rabbi.
it's emotion. And if you can tap into that, and you cannot tap into that unless you take a good look at your audience, half of which is your enemy, and see them as people and see their hearts and see what they're thinking. I think you're right. The liberalism, as it's grown, the anger against liberalism has grown, right? And liberals said in the 1950s, stop telling me gay men can't be school teachers, and don't tell me we're going to make them get married one day. That's crazy. Well, they were right, the Republicans. That's what happened. That was the slippery slope, and their heads are exploding over these realities, right? So they're getting madder and madder. But stop. Find the person, go fishing. That's what you have to do. And when you tell a story, you're reaching into what's the real part of this person, what's the human part of this person, because that's going to get the audience to feel drawn in and not pushed away. And it's hard to do in life, right? I mean, if I could tell a personal story,
Please.
right? Crazy. I just met the other day the weirdest circumstances. I was sitting on a friend's couch and Kevin McCarthy walked in the room eating Captain Crunch. Okay. So all of that is very confusing. And he sat down and I'm like, I can't believe I'm meeting Kevin McCarthy, let alone I'm in a room and have to talk to him. And
Also, I thought he was off sugar. I can't believe.
no, he's
eating
back
Captain
on.
Crunch.
He's back on. It had crunch berries, actually, to be honest. I mean, I was very paying close attention. When I talked to him for an hour, and then I told my friends, you won't believe what happened. They all, did you tell him this? And did you yell at him and tell him this? No, of course not. Because the benefit for me for that 45 minutes is to listen. The benefit for me is to learn who he is so I can find my entrance. Where's his opening? What is he really about? Right? And that's how we're going to find each other. And when someone offers you that, it's the greatest feeling ever because you feel seen. And that's the thing we're most wanting, I think, in our society.
It is so wise. And I'm very impressed that you did that, because as somebody who, I live in Washington, I cover Washington, I do see those moments happen every single day on Capitol Hill. Yes, they yell at each other in public. Yes, they get like nothing done, but there are relationships across the aisle, and it doesn't exist as much as it did, but it does still exist. But I also know a lot of very committed liberals who would have done what some of your friends said and started screaming at him, or even just walked out of the room. But where does that get you?
Can I add that this work is not for everybody? This is really important. I think many of us are familiar with the story of Derek Black, who was a former son of the Grand Wizard of the KKK, who went to this liberal arts college somehow, and a Jewish kid invited him for Shabbos dinner at his house. And it ends up that he gets invited back week after week after week, and he ends up renouncing his ties to the movement and to his family. Because he realizes through this kind of arduous work of fishing together and talking together and eating Captain Crunch together that these people aren't monsters. And I love those stories. Those are incredible stories. That work is not for everybody. It's not safe for everybody to be in the room. I mean, I think as long as we acknowledge the privilege that comes with being able to safely sit in the room with people who hold views that really dehumanize many of us, then the work is for some to sit in the room, build relationships. I hope you got his cell phone number, and I hope you will use it, because I think that it's amoral to have Kevin McCarthy's phone number in your phone. It's immoral not to use it when you need it, right? So I hope he'll hear from you again now that you have a nice relationship with him. And I think we have to, the people who can sit at the Shabbos table and have those conversations should do it. That work is for some. The work for others is to be in the street, protesting. And I think that that's part of the chorus of that is required for social change to actually happen.
Right. And I do have his number. I can't show you. He told me not to show you specifically or any Jews. He said, don't show any Jews. He said, as a result of our nice conversation, he actually invited me to come to Washington, screen National Treasure for Congress and talk about it as a way of him inviting everyone to a movie night. And this does get to where movies
Good for
are the
you.
great
That's amazing.
unifier.
Wait, it's not amazing yet. I mean, it's not amazing yet. You can go and screen your movie, but what is the message that you're carrying with the movie? Because now you have a relationship with him and he'll listen to you in ways that he won't listen to others. So it will be amazing when this relationship becomes an opportunity to push him to transform his understanding of what America is and what America could be.
And I will push on a line from National Treasure. I know, because that's why I want to go. And I don't want the actors to come because they'll steal my attention and I want to be able to talk to them. But there's a line in National Treasure where Nick Cage says to the president of the United States, I know you'll do the right thing because you're the president. And whether by your oath of office or natural character, you will do the right thing. And the president says to him, people don't believe that stuff anymore. And Nick says, I know, but they want to believe it.
Right.
And that's their mission. Get us to believe again. Because we want to so badly. We want heroes. We want mommy and daddy to fix our problems in a great way and set good examples for us. That's what we're dying for, all of us. And that's what they need to do.
We can clap for that. I believe that. I appreciate the multifaceted nature of this conversation and that we're speaking, that this needs to be addressed from an evolutionary biology point of view, from a psychological point of view, social, cultural, spiritual, creative, artistic. I want to say that I mean, there absolutely needs to be policy change. Like this isn't, we need to all look within ourselves and see what kind of change we need to make. There's a reason that extremism is thriving in America, and it's because it was systematically defunded. The study of extremism in America was defunded specifically during the Obama administration because they did not want the story. The Obama administration was pressured to take the funding away because they did not want the narrative to be that there was this rising force of white nationalism that opposed Obama's presidency, because we all had this dream of a purple country. So this needs to be funded. There need to be strong policy responses. There need to be strong hate crime laws, etc. And we have to do the internal work, the spiritual work, the cultural shift. So I just want to, as we come to, close to the close today, it has to be all of these things and not any one of them. I also want to bring Hannah Arendt into the room for a moment, if I may, because Hannah Arendt wrote, who of course fled Berlin at the time of the Nazis rising to power. Hannah Arendt wrote that the precondition for tyranny is isolation and social alienation. Moments ago, the more isolated we are from each other, the less we understand, the less we are willing to sit in the room with one another and across the table, the more likely it is that the people who have really, I think, nefarious ideas of where the country should go will be able to do so effectively. I read a deeply troubling study a couple of years ago that something like 30% of Americans have no interactions at all with their neighbors and have not one person in their life that they see as a confidant, someone who they can trust and share when their hearts are broken. And that is a precondition of tyranny. So it's about building relationships. It's about eradicating shame from the self. It's about, telling new stories. It's about political change and voting rights and fighting against anti-trans legislation. It's about all of these things. And so I deeply appreciate the multidisciplinary approach that you started us off with this morning. Thank you.
Do you have any presidential ambitions?
Absolutely not.
Both of you, thank you so much. What a fantastic discussion. I learned so much from each of you. Appreciate it. And thank you again for inviting me, inviting all of us for this incredibly incredibly important topic. Thank you.
Thank you all.
So thank you to Dana, the entire panel. I've been given the unenviable task of trying to sum up a lot of what was discussed today. My name is, well, I'm married to an Austrian. I should say my name is Dr. Robert Williams, but I'm from Kentucky. I'm Rob Williams. I'm the executive director of the Shoah Foundation. You know, as John Turteltaub just said, today's pretty amazing. So in more ways than not, I'm a reform policymaker. I spent the better part of the last 10 years in rooms across the EU discussing anti-Semitism and extremism. Most of the time I leave going, eh. But today I actually have some hope because I think we're able to reach more people. So let's start summing things up. You know, it was about 100 years ago today that H.G. Wells, a different sort of storyteller, the man who brought us the time machine and War of the Worlds, he made a very prescient statement. He said, the world today is in a race between catastrophe and education. Now, he wrote these words with the shadow of the First World War in mind, an event that he chalked up to two things: our inability to relate to one another on individual terms and being blinded by what he called the blinkers of nationalism, an inability to think of any country but your own. A few years later, Wells and others watched as anti-Semitic, fascist, totalitarian movements swept across Europe from the former Russian Empire to Britain and across the Atlantic Ocean. These groups attacked people in the streets and committed acts of terror. Some failed to thrive, too many were successful, and those that succeeded followed a basic playbook. They engaged in political violence, they rejected the individual and instead promoted myths about groups. They created cults of personality around blowhards and would-be heroes. They used the technologies of the day, first the car and the loudspeaker, then film and radio, to propagandize and to recruit. We often forget the other key point that made them successful. Most of these groups, including the Nazi Party, came to power through democratic elections. Now, many members of the Nazi Party or the Ustasha or the Iron Guard or the Arrow Cross, they shared some features in common. They felt isolated by the political, moral, or social norms of the day. They rejected or at least chose not to cope with the changing world around them. They felt detached, so they sought solace in the lies of conspiracy theories, in the words of demagogues, and in a belief that marginalized groups were somehow responsible for them not winning. Catastrophe followed, a break in our civilization that we now recognize as the Holocaust. Now, the Holocaust was the German-led genocide of approximately 6 million Jews across Europe and North America, but it did not stop with the Jews. As my good friend, the eminent Israeli historian Yehuda Bauer has said many times, 35 million people died in World War II because the Germans and their collaborators wanted to destroy the Jewish people. After the war, we, principally the United States and our allies, hoped we might establish an international system of human rights to protect us from such disaster in the future, a way to right the wrongs of the past. And there has been progress. We have more opportunities to understand one another today through education and through communication. Laws, until they're repealed, protect our basic civil rights. And in better times, we've seen evidence that healthy democracies built on checks and balances can minimize anti-Semitism, racism, deprivation, and various forms of conflict. But we sit on shaky ground, and I'm not just saying that because we're in California. Across the world, forces once again call for the end of liberal democracy, traffic in anti-Semitism and hate, and rely on divisive politics and rhetoric that put all of us at risk. The past doesn't echo, it booms, but things have changed. Today's extremists pick from a grab bag of ideologies that fit their preconceived biases. That's why when you go online, you see something scary. You see, it's not just neo-Nazis in this corner and eco-terrorists in that corner. You see multiple movements speaking and engaging with one another in the same space. Sure, you have the extremists that we've long been plagued with, the Klan or neo-Nazis, but you also see a bevy of anti-government groups, accelerationists, ethno-nationalists, conspiracy theorists, so-called men's rights activists, incels, edgelords, and others. But there's also a horseshoe effect, whereby persons on the other end of the spectrum, including anarchists, eco-terrorists, communists, anti-globalists, end up adopting views similar to those on the far right. You also see religious extremists in these spaces. Most troubling, though, you see us, John Q and Jane Q Public, in these spaces online, because although the internet has made us more aware of these problems, it's also increased the chances that our children or our neighbors can encounter these ideologies and simply become radicalized by clicking through. Sadly, not only have extremist groups recognized the polarizing power of the internet, but so too have a few foreign governments. And let's stay closer to home before I start beating up on Russia. As early as 1984, American neo-Nazis established 2 online networks here in the United States, World Wide Web. Soon, more refined extremist spaces began to appear online. Some still exist there. And the misinformation sphere only continued to grow. It now includes dedicated sites that serve as incubators for hate, encrypted platforms that allow state and non-state actors to coordinate messages, and chat apps where extremists not only publish their manifestos, but occasionally live stream their deadly attacks. Extremist content spikes before moments that test our democracy, including elections, protests, and terror attacks. I'll give you one potent example. Anti-Semitic conspiracy memes spiked online in the days leading up to the Tree of Life massacre in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in 2019. These memes had a simple message. Jewish individuals like George Soros or Jewish institutions were importing non-white migrants to overthrow our elections and to replace the dominant white culture as they saw it. Therefore, when he went on Gab, the perpetrator of that attack stated he was going to do something because he believed Jewish institutions, quote, are bringing in invaders that kill our people. He murdered 11 and injured 6 others, and this same belief also influenced the suspect in the murder of the 10 grocery store shoppers in a predominantly Black neighborhood in Buffalo last spring. Several foreign countries understand this reality. China, Russia, and others have sophisticated online operations that are now sowing confusion, attacking at-risk populations, and undermining democratic institutions around the world. Their targets include ethnic groups, foreign nationals, political dissidents, and women. Yes, women. The State Department, Canada, and the EU only a couple of weeks ago confirmed that intelligence and messaging operations coming from certain countries are using misogynistic and violent content in order to deter women from participating in the public sphere and from voting in elections. Today's extremisms are different, but our resolve to end them must be stronger because extremist violence is on the rise. We've heard about ADL statistics. Let me share some others. Domestic terrorism, as confirmed by the Government Accountability Office, has increased 357% in 10 years. Most of these attacks happen here, or in my hometown of Washington, D.C., or in New York City. Racism was the motivation behind 35% of these attacks, followed by anti-government beliefs. Those tasked with protecting us, law enforcement, are increasingly at risk of being the object of an attack. 43% of all attacks in 2021 focused on the police, and who carried these out? 48% came from the far left, 37% from the far right, and the remainders came from Salafi jihadist terror groups. You see, extremism is not just the realm of the far right. In 2021, there were also indications that leftist attacks are on the rise. Now, they still pale in comparison to attacks coming from the extreme right, and extreme rights attacks are still the most deadliest. Of the 30 murders last year, 28 came from the far right. But this is a problem that does not know ideological boundaries. So what do? At the simplest level, we have to engage in communication. We have to educate. Now, a lot of people might be surprising to hear, don't actually know when they're engaging in rhetoric or behavior that could be dangerous. We all have unconscious biases. I said I came from Kentucky. I can confirm that this is true. We often have all said things that may not be acceptable today, but we learned, we changed our behavior because somebody pointed out that what we were thinking or saying was wrong. We also have to remember as Americans that we are not alone. Many countries have faced and continue to face these challenges. As Arnold, Erroll, and others have pointed out, countries like Austria, countries like France, heck, most of the EU have action plans in place to counter anti-Semitism and other forms of extremism, if not dedicated government institutions like the DILCRA in France to deal with these problems. There are best practices we can learn. And there are also examples from our past. Sorry, I'm an historian. Few communities were as radicalized as the Germans during the Nazi era. But anti-Semitism and Nazism did not end in May of 1945. It took generations, but eventually West Germany, and today the whole of the Federal Republic, became a strong democracy that affirms human rights. This only happened for two reasons. One, the German people resolved to come to terms with the past. They have a wonderful word for this, Vergangenheitsbewältigung. But it's something that is very serious and deeply ingrained in German, and I would argue today in Austrian society as well. The other secret was international cooperation, led by the United States, which aspired to assist countries on the path to democracy through diplomacy and through international exchange, through educational programs, through learning and speaking to one another, to opening our eyes to reality. Sadly, too many of these programs have gone the way of the dodo. That's why universities like USC are so vital to the future we seek, that being a more peaceable future. We also cannot be complacent. Erroll mentioned the Oklahoma City attacks of 1995 that claimed 168 lives. Because of Oklahoma City, because of the search for the Unabomber, because when you take away attacks like September 11th, the vast majority of terror attacks that have happened in our country have come from the far right. Our government at one point was focused on minimizing right-wing extremism. But then September 11th happened. Our focus shifted. We became complacent. This gave right-wing and left-wing movements an opportunity to grow. And just as extremism cuts across ideological divides, so too must our response. This is a bipartisan concern, but it is not a bipartisan concern in practice. We need to push for change because it doesn't matter if extremism comes from the left or from the right. The outcome is the same. We also need to remember our personal responsibility to stand up. Many atrocities born of extremism, even genocides like the Holocaust, happened because two groups took certain actions. On the one hand, you had the perpetrators, but on the other hand, you had the tens, if not hundreds of thousands of passive eyewitnesses, or those who profited off of these crimes, or those who just stuck their head in the sand and didn't speak up. Now, yes, there were some who decided to resist. There were some who decided to rescue, but they were too few. At the end of the day, there were just too few sufficiently educated to be stronger than hate. So when we educate, we need to remember a few things. We need to remember that not every person who holds extremist views is beyond redemption or necessarily a dangerous radical. Very few people want to be on the wrong side of history. That's why dialogue matters. That's also why influential voices like Arnold's matter. I can't underestimate or understate the value of his online chats, his outreach to the world, and the use of his tremendous platform to bring about change. He uses his voice for good because he knows the world we live in is in trouble. We have a responsibility to model this behavior. Whether we're influencers or not, whether we are leaders or not, we have to be brave enough to stand up so that we can draw the world's attention to the need to bring about peace. And just as we need the voices of the influential, we also have to engage in dialogue with the victims of extremist violence, be it through discussions like the ones we're having, or through engagement with the tens of thousands of testimonies housed here at USC and the Shoah Foundation, learning from those who've had the experience, the insight, the humanity to illuminate the dangers of extremism is necessary. In short, if we don't run away from these opportunities, if we don't learn from the past, if we don't engage in dialogue with one another, catastrophe will win that race. And when it does, we will all suffer for it. With that, I want to thank all of you for coming today. I want to thank especially Governor Schwarzenegger for kickstarting this important dialogue, to his team, especially Conyers, for organizing this, and to all of you for being here today. So thank you.